We have been through all of the steps to learn how to solve a trigonometric equation. This is one of the equations that's completely brand new to you, and we have gone through all of the steps. So the first step was to label the sides with opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse, depending on the angle that you were given. We went in and we labeled all of the sides, whether they were O or A or H. Then we decided whether we wanted to use sine or cosine or tangent, and we decided that based off of SOHCAHTOA, which sides did you have? Opposite and hypotenuse for sine, adjacent and hypotenuse for cosine, or opposite and adjacent for tangent. Then we set up the equation. Remember, we said the function of the angle equals the side over the side, and we set it up to solve. So we're on the last step. Today we're going to put them all together and learn how to solve trig equations. And the good thing is it basically comes down to one of three things that you have to do: multiply, divide, or inverse. And we're going to talk about inverse later. So we're going to start every problem. Let me take a step back and say one thing. One thing, if you're using a calculator or on your phone, you have got to make sure, so you need to star this, highlight it, draw some arrows to it or whatever, but you need to make sure that your calculator or your phone is set in degrees, not in radians. If it says RAD, then it is in radians. It should say DEG or not say anything. So you will want to be sure that you practice typing these in on your calculator, particularly if you're using an iPhone. You may not want to use an iPhone for this just because of the way that you have to type it in your calculator is a little bit different. So I recommend either using the calculator or using a Desmos calculator, the calculator online on Desmos, because you can just type it in the way that it's supposed to be typed. Apple is just a little bit backwards in how you have to put in the information, and so I don't want you to get confused. So definitely you need to not just take my word for these answers. You need to type them into your phone to make sure that you know how to get these answers the right way. Sorry, I needed to turn my iPad over. So the first thing that we always do is we label our sides with O, A, and H. So here is my angle, and based on that angle, X is the opposite side and 16 is the hypotenuse side. We can also label our adjacent side. It doesn't have any information on it. So then I have a side with O and with H. So that would be so or sine. So we set it up. The sine of the angle is equal to the opposite side, X, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 16. Now, if you look at this, this is kind of like if we kind of take a step back, let's get away from the sign and not worry about it. Sine of 38 is just a decimal number. In fact, if you type it in on your calculator, you get the sine of 38 is 0.61566614, and it keeps going. So the sine of 38 is just a number, just like the square root of 38 is just a number. It's an exact number, and we're not writing all of the decimals. So when you do this, think about it like this. If this was 5 is equal to X over 2, just take a step back. How would you solve that problem? Well, that says 5 is equal to X divided by 2. If I want to isolate the variable of X, then I need to get rid of that divided by 2. Well, the inverse of division is multiplication, and so I would multiply by 2, and I would multiply by 2. These 2's on the right cancel out, and 2 times 5 is 10, so you get X is equal to 10. So now we're going to apply that same idea over here, and notice your X is on top, so I want to isolate that variable. So that means I want to get rid of that divided by 16. So I'm going to multiply by 16, and I'm going to multiply by 16. And then the good thing is then you can type all of this, 16 times the sine of 38. You can type that into your calculator just like that. 16 times the sine of 38, and you get 9.85058. And it says to round to the nearest tenth. The tenth is 1 decimal place. Okay, 1 decimal place. So 9.85 would become 9.9. So when x is on top, you're going to multiply. Okay, so let's look at the next problem, number 2. We've got our angle is 28. Based on this angle, 10 is opposite and x is adjacent. We don't have anything on our hypotenuse. So which one uses O and A? That would be TOA or tangent. So you set it up. The tangent of the angle is equal to the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. Now, when you're showing your work, you need to write that statement down. You cannot do this in your head. You have got to write the tangent of 28 is equal to 10 over x. You've got to write that down on paper. Now, here's the problem. We need to get that off of the bottom. So here's one thing that you could do. Say, for instance, it was 5 is equal to 3 over x. Well, one of the things you could do if it helped is you could divide by, put over 1, and then you could cross multiply, which gives you 5x is equal to 3. And then you would divide both sides by 5 to get x by itself. So we're going to do that same thing. So let's look at this step. So we're going to multiply both sides by x, because the problem is we can't solve for x when it's in the denominator. So now I have x times the tangent of 28 is equal to 10. Well, don't forget, the tangent of 28 is just a number. So now I'm going to divide by the tangent of 28 and divide by the tangent of 28. So you can type that all in one step. X is equal to 10 divided by the tangent of 28. And it says round to the nearest tenth, so that would be 18.8. Now, you'll start to notice a pattern, and as you practice these, you'll get better, and you won't have to use the steps of the algebra so much, as you'll just remember what to do. When x is on top, you multiply, and when x is on bottom, you divide, and you always start with the side. So I started with 16 in number 1, and I started typing in 10 in number 2. So let's look at number 3. Number 3 says we're looking at 56. So compared to the 56, the 25 is adjacent and the x is opposite. So that's O and A, or TOA. So that would be tangent. So the tangent of the angle is equal to the opposite side. It's TOA, OA, opposite divided by adjacent. Now again, notice tangent of 56 is just a number on your calculator, but we don't want to round. That's why I don't have you go ahead and type that in, because we don't want to round and lose all the decimals that are important. But I do want to get x by itself. X is on top, so I just want to get rid of that divided by 25. So I'm going to multiply by 25, multiply by 25. So x is equal to 25 times the tangent of 56. Now, you don't have to write that step out. As you get better and better, you won't need to, but you might at least put it in your notes so that you've got it to see what to do. So then you can just type it all in at one time, 25 tangent of 56, and round to the nearest tenth, you should get 37.1. Now, again, you need to be trying these by typing these into the calculator to make sure that you're getting the same answers that I'm getting, because sometimes how you type it into the calculator really affects whether you get it right or wrong. And we want to make sure that we can tell whether the problem is your setup or whether your problem is your cleanup and how you solve the problem. So let's look at number 4. Number 4, we have our angle is 51. Based on that, we have our x is our adjacent. Remember, this is where you got to be careful, because it looks like the 16 could be adjacent, but even better, it is adjacent, but even better, it's hypotenuse. And so you got to label it with h. So don't forget, go in and label that h. I should have started with it first just to be sure I didn't make a mistake. I set it up where I could have made a mistake. So then we need which one uses A and H. So ka-toa. So that uses A and H, cosine. So we set it up. The cosine of 51 degrees is equal to the adjacent side x divided by the hypotenuse 16. Now, again, your variable is on top. We like it when the variable is on top. So we just need to get rid of this divided by 16 by doing the inverse. So we have this additional step if you want to write it down. 16 times the cosine of 51. If you type that into your calculator just like that, 16 cosine 51, then you get that x is, and you round to the nearest tenth, then you get that x is 10.1. Remember, what that tells us is that's how long that side is. So this is very useful to us because there are situations where we might know a side and we might know an angle and we need to know the other information. So now you got to be careful in number 5. In number 5, I want to know x and y. So here's how you do this, and this is where go ahead and label all of your pieces. So we have this 56-degree angle where hypotenuse is 16. Start with your hypotenuse. X is O and Y is adjacent. Now, notice that there is something written on all 3 sides. But if I use O and A, or tangent, at the same time, then I end up with an X and a Y, and I can't have 2 variables. So I need to use 1 variable at a time. So for just a minute, I'm going to ignore the Y. Okay, so just ignore that the Y is even there. And let's just look at the X. So if I just look at the X, then I'm going to need to use the opposite side and the hypotenuse. Well, that is sine. So, okay, S-O-H. So I would say the sine of 56 is equal to the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. Now we like this one because x is on top, and that's always good when x is on top. It makes it work a little bit easier. So we can multiply both sides by 16. So I can type that in. X is equal to 16 times the sine of 56. So 16 sine 56, and I get 13.3. Then that's rounded, 13.2646. So I find out that x is 13.3. Now at this point, notice that now you have 2 of the 3 sides. If you wanted to, you could do Pythagorean theorem. But the problem is you would have to use the x value, and you don't know for sure that you got the x value right. So I like to go ahead and just continue what I'm doing. And now let's go back. And let's pretend that x isn't there. So if you just ignore, we're just going to ignore the opposite side, and we're going to use our adjacent side and our hypotenuse. So if I use adjacent and hypotenuse, that's ca, C-A-H, so that's cosine. So I say the cosine of 56 is equal to the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. So again, we have our variable on top, so we just need to get rid of this divided by 16. So I multiply by 16, so 16, so y is equal to 16 cosine 56. So if I type that in, 16 cosine 56, I get that y is 8.947, or 8.9 if I round it. So when you have 2 variables, you just need to take 1 variable at a time. You can't do more than that. And so you just kind of need to ignore the other one for a minute. So let's take a look at this last problem. I have this 50-degree angle. I have that the hypotenuse is y. I have that x is adjacent, and I have that 12 is opposite. Again, I have x and y. So let's ignore y for a minute, and let's just look at 12, which is opposite, and x, which is adjacent. So opposite and adjacent, that's TOA. So I would set up tangent. So tangent of 50 is opposite over adjacent. Now, again, notice this one, x is on the bottom. So we want to get x off of the bottom. So we're going to multiply both sides by x. Now you're going to get where you can be good at this and you don't have to write this middle step out. So I have x times the tangent of 50 is equal to 12, and then I can divide by the tangent of 50. Once you get good at this, skip straight to here. 12 divided by the tangent of 50. Every other time, notice I did the side times the tangent of 50 when x was on top. Okay, so when x was on top, it was the side times the trig of the angle. Okay, if x is on bottom, it's the side divided by the trig of the angle, the sine of the angle, the cosine of the angle, the tangent of the angle. Okay, so you'll get to where you can skip straight from here to here. And in fact, you probably will get to, at some point maybe, you'll get to where you can skip straight to setting up, going from the setup, tangent of 50 is equal to 12 over x, to the answer of 10.1. You don't have to show your work. You do have to show this. You have to show this much right here, and then you have to show your answer. So you are able to write the equation and then go straight to the final answer once you get some good practice with this. So the last piece, we need to know what y is. So now let's ignore x. So we're just going to ignore that x. So to do y, we need the opposite side and the hypotenuse side. So opposite and hypotenuse, that's sine. So that's s. So sine of 50 is equal to opposite 12 over hypotenuse, which is y. Now remember, we talked about it. If you get to where you can shortcut this, then it's going to be y is equal to 12 divided by the sine of 50. When y is on the bottom, it's going to be divided, a divided problem. So then you would type in 12 divided by the sine of 50, and you get 15.665 or 15.7 if you round to the nearest tenth. Okay, so again, let me remind you, when x is on top, say for instance, if you have the sine of 56 is equal to x over 16, you would solve it by saying x is equal to 16 times the sine of 56, the side times the trig of the angle. If you have a problem where it is on bottom, so like one of the ones we just did, the tangent of 50 is equal to 12 over x. Remember, you still type in the sine first, or the side first. It's 12 divided by the tangent of the angle. Okay, so if it's on top, you multiply side times the trig, and if it's on bottom, then you do side divided by the trig, and that's what gives you the final answer. Be sure you check these on your